The Ancestral Trail, Book 2, Tolosh of the Garoon. Published by Marshall Cavendish, 1993. Based on a story by Frank Graves. Neither Richard nor Melek could see where Orcan might have gone. Peering nervously around, they left the shelter of the boulders. Then they heard Orcan's strangled calls.
"Help! Help! Somebody help me!"
"Orcan, where are you? I can't see you," Richard shouted.
"Over here, near the tree!"
Richard scanned the area. "Look, Melek, down there!" he cried. Richard and Melek ran over and found Orcan lying spread-eagled on the ground. He was pinned in position by dozens of dark red worms. Their long, thin bodies lanced from the ground and wrapped around Orcan's limbs with a sinewy strength.
"Try to get my sword," Orcan said urgently. "Cut these things off. Be careful where you tread. I think the whole patch is infested." Gingerly, Richard leaned forward and pulled Orcan's sword from its scabbard. He could only just reach it, and as his fingertips closed around its pommel, he saw a flickering in the ground. He snatched the weapon and jumped back. Then he went quickly to work on the worms. Once severed, the bodies whipped smartly back into the earth, and soon Orcan jumped free. "What on earth are they?" Richard asked, watching the last slithery body disappear into the ground. I don't know," Orcan shuddered. "We've a long way to go yet," Orcan said, taking his sword back off Richard, "and we're bound to see a lot more dangerous beasts before this quest is finished. For now, we'd better get on. Which way does the book say, Melek?"
The dwarf cast a worried glance at Orcan and tugged nervously at the straps that secured the Book of Prophecies. Then something caught Richard's eye. "What was that sparkling?" he said. "Melek, pass me the book." As Melek took the book from his shoulders, Richard carefully inspected it. He saw nothing but dust and parchment. Then the same glint showed as he handed it back. "There," Richard said, "there's something in the spine." He pulled out a narrow length of metal, which had a glass arrow set in it. The glass was coloured, but Richard could not say precisely what colour it was. First it seemed one, and then another, as if the whole spectrum was battling for supremacy. "What is it?" he asked Melek.
"It must be the ancient Pathfinder," Melek gasped. "It's one of our oldest treasures. Everyone thought it long lost. Can I see it?"
As Richard handed Melek the mysterious object, the colours in the glass died down, and it turned a dull, dusty grey.
"I don't know how it works," Melek said, "but if our legends are true, it should guide you to your heart's desire on the path of life."
"Well, our lives depend on the pods now," Richard said, "so if we want to find one, this should show us the way."
"That's right," Melek replied.
Grasping the instrument in his hand, Richard swung it in an arc across the plain. Nothing happened at first, but as he turned the tip of the arrow, it began to glow a rich amber. Then, when it was pointing roughly upstream, the metal pulsed, and a flush of blue ran down the glass. They stood transfixed as its cool radiance lit up Richard's palms. "It glows strongest in that direction," Richard said, "where that awful wailing is coming from." In their excitement at their surprise find, the three had ignored the strange noise.
"Let's go," Orcan said with an impatient shrug. "We'll look at Melek's book later."
"All right," Richard said, returning the Pathfinder to Melek, who slid it into its hiding place. The dwarf lifted the heavy book back onto his small shoulders. The three trudged through the dusty grassland, following the river at a wary distance. The vast clearing stretched in a wide crescent fringed by the forest. After a while, shrubs sprouted here and there. The boulders became fewer, and then the river widened into a large, clear lake. As they got close to the lake, the wailing abated. Richard noticed some strange hairy growths swirling around in the water. Then he saw that they were heads with long flowing hair. Suddenly the heads rose in unison, and their piteous cries for help filled the air again.
Help us! Save us!
Richard turned around. They must be drowning. Quick, Melek, your rope.
Wait, Orcan said. They could be Tolosh. Get down, both of you, now.
Following Orcan's example, Richard and Melek threw themselves to the ground. But what's wrong? Richard hissed.
Shh! Over there, Orcan said. Look.
They saw a tall figure in rough blue battle dress approaching the lake. As the figure drew near the water's edge, the voices started pleading with him.
Help us! We're trapped!
Now that he was closer, the trio could see a face with high cheekbones, yellow skin, and almond-shaped eyes that glinted in the sunlight. A leopard man, Orcan murmured. The figure bent towards the water and stretched out his hand. Then it happened. Suddenly the leopard man's face contorted with horror. As the three looked on, they saw the almond-eyed traveller being pulled into the midst of the wailing figures.
Look over there!
Melek pointed across the lake.
As I thought, Orcan growled.
Richard followed their gaze. The bank of dead grass was beginning to move. It stirred in clumps and tussocks until the whole lakeside appeared to be alive. As it rippled and ruckled, he saw that it was not grass at all, but hair. As Richard watched, spellbound, the mass of hair separated into individual heads that rose on tiny, doll-like bodies. When their mouths opened, Richard's heart gave a jump, and he forgot any comparisons he might have made with dolls. It looked as if the creatures' heads were about to split in two, revealing gaping chasms lined with serried ranks of sharp, shark-like teeth. One by one, the creatures slid like otters into the lake. Only the barest ripple revealed their presence beneath the surface. And suddenly the leopard man gave a convulsive jerk and disappeared from sight. A second later he re-emerged, waving an arm. His face was screwed up in pain, and the water turned red. It became a boiling, snapping fury of piranha like Tolosh. The long-haired creatures had joined in the feeding frenzy. The traveller came out once again, but this time he made no noise. He disappeared beneath a seething coat of wet fur and went down for the final time. Within seconds, the lake was calm. All that remained of the traveller was a red bloom that spread smokily through the water before drifting idly downstream. On the opposite bank, the Tolosh were out of the water and drying themselves in the sun. Before long, they were once more invisible against their surroundings. Those in the water had grown silent and were waiting for their next victim. For a while, the three were numb with shock, and then Orcan broke the silence.
I was going to tell you about the Tolosh when the leopard man came along, he said glumly. They hide near water and use decoys to trap unsuspecting travellers. They pretend to drown or be in trouble and plead for help. On land they're harmless, but in the water, well, you saw for yourselves what they're capable of.
I wonder if this was in the Book of Prophecies, Melek murmured.
Then, rifling through the pages, he read aloud.
Rock conceals and grass deceives, but heroes win the day. An arrow gold behind the leaves shows the brave the way. Peril, water, death await. Avoid the tempting hand. Purple eyes that have no fate twice arrive, but not too late, to pluck from death the shining grail and lead them to another place.
Melek and Orcan turned questioning eyes towards Richard. Richard thought for a moment. Well, the first two lines make sense, but the rest... I'm not sure. Could it be your arrows, Orcan? No, yours aren't golden. He looked over Melek's shoulder, frowning at the old-fashioned script. I've got it! The Pathfinder. That's shaped like an arrow, isn't it? Avoid the tempting hand. Water and death must be a warning about the Tolosh. I don't understand the purple eyes twice, though.
I think we should move on now, Orcan shrugged. The trouble is, I don't know this area too well.
There's someone coming, Melek cried. We've got to warn him.
The three ran towards the figure, shouting for him to stop. At the same time, the decoys, wailing, started again, drowning out their warning cries. Spotting the trio, the figure stopped just short of the lake and waited for them.
What's the hurry?
He spoke in an easy drawl. It was another leopard man. Richard had never met a leopard man in his life, and yet he sensed Golan's voice telling him to trust the stranger. Then Richard noticed his eyes. They were purple, as in the riddle. "Tolosh!" Richard shouted. "There's Tolosh in the lake!"
"Tolosh?" the stranger queried.
The decoys were still wailing and pleading.
"Help! We're stuck in the mud! Please help us!"
"Don't listen to them," Richard said. "They've just eaten a leopard man who went to help them."
That must have been Rabat," the stranger said. "He went on ahead of me. He was a good fighter."
He looked down for a moment, and he raised his head.
"My name's Mercat, by the way. And you are?"
Suddenly his dagger came to rest against Richard's windpipe.
"Let him go," Melek shouted bravely. "He's the chosen one."
The purple eyes slid sideways.
"That's easy to say. I'll kill this fool and slice the rest of you to ribbons before you know what's happening."
He pushed on his dagger so that a trickle of blood welled at Richard's throat.
"Now, who are you?"
Just wait a minute,
Orcan said, drawing his sword so quickly that Mercat felt its tip on his heart before he had a chance to move.
Harm the boy, and you're dead.
Mercat glared at Orcan, but he made no attempt to drop his weapon.
The boy's been given a quest by Golan, keeper of the life force, Orcan declared furiously.
Mercat's sword moved back a fraction.
He's the only one who can overcome the evil one. Besides, we just saved your life.
Mercat sneered. "Perhaps I do owe you one."
He gestured towards the lake and sheathed his dagger. Richard breathed a sigh of relief and touched his throat. There was no real harm done, but now he felt cold and tired. Richard wondered whether he would be able to see this quest through.
"I am a man of honour," Mercat said proudly. "You saved my life, so I'll do anything I can to help you."
"We're looking for the life force pods," Richard said with relief.
"And what do these pods look like?" Mercat asked.
"Well, they're small and smooth," Richard explained, "and dark and shiny. The prophecy says, 'Pluck from death the shining grail.' Well, the Holy Grail is what King Arthur's knights search for, just as we're searching for the pods. Plucking from death," Richard nodded towards the creatures, "could mean that they have the pod in there." The sound of splashing echoed from the lake. The Tolosh decoys had been listening to their conversation. A plaintive whine came from the decoys.
"We can help you. There's a pod in a casket at the bottom of the lake. You just need to dive down for it. Come, we'll show you where it is."
Mercat's eyes narrowed to venomous slits. He strode towards the water and aimed his spear. It missed the decoys. "Wait," Richard said. "They'll kill you, just as they killed your friend. Look over there." He pointed to the opposite bank, where the grass was already beginning to heave. "I have a better idea." Richard spoke with Melek and Orcan. Then, to the long-haired creatures in the water, he said, "How do we know you have the pod? I'll come in and get it, but first I want to see it." By now, The Tolosh were plopping into the water in anticipation. One decoy gave a nod and beckoned to the others. Then she disappeared under the water. While Richard and his companions stared out over the lake's glassy surface, the decoys swam down to the underlying ooze. They moved with sinuous ease, turning and wriggling eel-like in the underwater currents. They were no longer decoys, but true water Tolosh. Their faces showed the same rapacious teeth as the land Tolosh, but their skin was more hideous. A lifetime spent in the water had rotted their features to a pulpy grey mass. Eyes bulged like gluey balls. Lips had become scaly strips of flesh. Noses were little more than collapsing blobs of gristle. On some, the chin had fallen away to leave nothing but bare bone. Down they swirled to the bottom of the lake, where, amidst a mass of weeds, lay a half-buried casket, its surface covered with slime. Shrivelled hands probed eagerly at its lock, flung open the lid, and snatched a small object from within. Then, in a flurry of activity that whirled clouds of silt into the clear water, the Tolosh sped upwards and held up the pod. "Bring it closer," Richard commanded. The decoy swam towards the shore. "Now!" Richard shouted. In Orkan's practised hand, Melek's rope whipped through the air. It wrapped itself around the decoy's wrist, which instantly reverted to its hideous form. He gave a sharp tug, and the pod flew out of her hand, and Richard snatched it out of the air. "Got it!" he cried triumphantly. Orkan, Melek, and Merkat crowded around him. The Tolosh shrieked and thrashed their water, and they fell silent. Richard stored the pod in his bag. "One down, 5 to go." He grinned at the others. "I can't believe we've done it." Orkan smiled. "I don't think we should hang around here. Which way next?" Melek pulled out the Pathfinder and handed it to Richard. Once again, the colours in the small arrow trembled into life before the tip turned faintly golden. "This way," Richard murmured.
"There's a riddle about the Pathfinder somewhere in the Book of Prophecies," Melek said. "Next time we stop, we'll have to find out exactly how it works."
As Melek slid the Pathfinder back into the spine of the book, Orkan turned to Merkat. "What's up ahead?"
"Forest, to begin with. I can show you the way through. By the look of you lot, you've already had a hard journey."
For the first time, the three realised what a battle-weary spectacle they must make. Richard and Orkan were smeared with dried slime from the encounter with the moss beast, and Melek was caked with mud. The trek across the grasslands had laid a sprinkling of red dust on all of them, and as they moved off, Richard told Merkat his story from the beginning.
"Impressive," Merkat said, "but your troubles are not over yet."
He nodded ahead to where the outriding trees of a large forest rose from the plain.
"This is where the real test starts, for all of us."
After the brightness of the grassland, the forest gloom left Richard feeling disorientated. It was good to be under cover again, but here the dark foliage could hide anything. The three followed their strange guide as he led them deeper into the trees.
"Keep close behind me," Merkat muttered, "and tread exactly in my footsteps. There's something I don't like here. The forest feels different. The paths seem to have changed. Everything's quieter. The trees look greyer. I can't help feeling we're being lured into a trap."
"Seems we're doing fine for now anyway," Richard said.
"Oh no, we're not," Orkan broke in. "Listen."
From deep in the forest they heard a thundering, crunching sound, as if something large was moving through the undergrowth. The noise had a rhythmic quality like the sound of soldiers marching in step.
"Could be Khazards," Merkat hissed. "The evil one's stormtroopers. If it is, we're really in trouble. Quick, into this thicket over here."
Orcan plunged into a clump of thorn trees, burrowing his way through at ground level, where the branches were sparsest. Richard and the others tunnelled swiftly after him. At the heart of the thicket was a small space, where some animal had once made its lair. Here the four waited in dread as the thundering noise came nearer. Then, when the sound was almost on top of them, it stopped abruptly. They crouched, as still as they could, hardly daring to breathe. From outside came a curious, high-pitched whistling, as if a train had just let off a head of steam. It lasted almost a minute before petering out into silence. Richard had never felt more afraid in his life. He stared at the thorns in front of him, willing whatever it was out there to go away. It did not work. As he prayed, the whole thicket was ripped open with terrifying force.